Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cullen, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grainne Wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the drooping and solitary, and those who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Buka fireside, the Marrow fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside we take a story from folklore or mythology, retell it, have a chat about the tale itself, and about the craft, culture and history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. Olahan and I am your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 66 of the Irish storytelling podcast. We are coming to you from isolation, from quarantine once again. I am not in the beautiful surroundings of the Head Stuff Podcast Network studios in Dublin. I'm at home in my family home in Wicklow Town, where I've spent we're now entering week 3 of the quarantine due to the attempt to flatten the curve of the coronavirus across the country and indeed across the world. The whole world is on lockdown. But hopefully it's working and hopefully it's getting results, and hopefully the effort we put in now, the sacrifices we all make now into giving up our various jobs and social activities, hopefully this will pay off immensely in the long run. And hopefully that this podcast can be, those of you that listen to it, this can be one more thing that can get you through a little bit more of each day in quarantine. And that is why I feel very fortunate to be able to continue this podcast during this time that I have the equipment to set up my own little home studio. Although I cannot wait to get back into the regular studio and get back to normality, as I'm sure we all can't. I hope you've all been keeping well, keeping your sanity. I hope you've all been able to keep some sense of routine, those that aren't working, that are isolated at home. I know myself, I'm someone whose the isolation is suited somewhat more than perhaps it would others, in that I'm very used to working on my own and used to being on my own, and I enjoy solitude quite a lot. And so I've definitely found keeping a kind of routine with some semblance of exercise, and then keeping away with my own work, with my own writing, and obviously keeping up to date with this podcast. These are the things that have really helped me get through the weeks, and are going to get me through the next couple of weeks as well. So I hope that you are all doing something similar. Those of you that are still in work, fair play to you, fair play to being able to go in, and I hope you're all safe in there, especially if there are any listeners who work on the front line in the health service. My God, the entire country and indeed the entire world salutes you. And I hope that if you do listen to this podcast, whether it's to go to sleep or it's to commute in the morning, that it can get you through a little bit more of that day. And hopefully those of you that are listening to this podcast in 6 months or a year's time, who are perhaps new listeners who will be only catching up then, hopefully this will all be an absolute distant memory, or certainly not a distant memory, because I don't think we'll ever forget this one, but that it will be in the past, and that we will all be back in the pub, which we will never, ever, ever underestimate ever again, or underappreciate indeed. Of course, if this is your very first time listening, I'd be surprised if this was their first episode to listen to it. But if it is, listen to this episode, or maybe listen to this introduction, and maybe go back to the very beginning of the podcast, all those episodes ago. Come back in episode 1 and see what we've been building up to over the last year and a half nearly. And if you enjoy it, keep listening. If you really enjoy it, follow me on Instagram at FiresideBard, all one word. Best place to keep up to date with this podcast and what I'm doing personally. And if you really enjoy the podcast now, there has never been a better time to become a patron of this podcast. Patreon.com/Fireside Podcast. I'm very fortunate that I can continue the podcast during this time. as I, like so many others, have lost a significant amount of work and gigs due to the virus. A lot of hopefully will be able to be rescheduled and will come back around. Those that listened last week will know that I had to cancel the upcoming live show. So I'm very fortunate to be able to even continue the podcast. So that indeed means that the support of the Patreon has never been more appreciated or more important. But as always, if you are not in a position that you can't, or you just like listening to this podcast for free, that is also fine. I listen to plenty of podcasts for free myself, and it's an egalitarian model that it's there for if you want. But I just want to lend a particular thanks this week to our two new patrons of the week, which is Kevin McCaffrey and Christina Fitzsimons. Sorry, my microphone slipped off its little stand there. Thank you so much to you two, and you joined the ranks of, certainly in the last months, to Nick Killison and Ben Clifford, Keenan Daly and Emily Brady have been the patrons that have joined in the last month, and I really, really, really appreciate it, especially at this difficult time where a lot of people can't work and a lot of people don't have any income coming in. So it has never meant more to me for you to contribute any amount to this podcast. This is very long introduction, but these are different times, and this podcast now this episode will become a time capsule to this period where we were all underground in hiding. But I'm going to get to the story now, because we continue the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology as we wind down the Ulster cycle, the final few stories now. This is a second part of a two-parter, which is the Champions portion, as you've seen from the title. The first part of the Champions portion was the story of Bicrú's feast, of Cuchulain, of Laoighaire Budhach and Conall Cernach, as they fought it out over who would get the Champions portion at Bicrú's feast, the sour host who was trying to cause trouble amongst the Red Branch Knights. And this is the second part and the conclusion of that tale of how the Champions portion was finally decided. And this is the Champions portion part 2, a trial of beheading on Fireside. The Champions portion, part 2, a trial of beheading. The feast at Bicrú's banquet hall had caused great consternation among the Red Branch Knights of Ulster. There, the bitter, sour host Bicrú had invited King Conall mac Daire and all his warriors to a mighty feast. But Bicrú had a plan to cause division and blood in the Red Branch. Bicrú had told 3 warriors, Laoighaire Budhach, Conall Cernach and Cuchulain, that they were all entitled to and should all fight for the Champions portion of the feast. By the end of the dinner, it appeared that Cuchulain was the obvious winner, but neither Laoighaire Budhach nor Conall Cernach would accept this. So Concabar's wise advisor, Shanka, made the decision that the Champions portion of the feast should be divided equally among all the assembled warriors, and that which of Conall, Laoighaire and Cuchulain would deserve it forevermore would be decided another day. And another day it would have to be decided, for the matter being still disputed ate away at Ulster's 3 contenders, which in turn spread down through the ranks of all the Red Branch Knights. Fights broke out every night, which went right back up to King Conall himself, who said to Shanka, "Enough. Let this matter be put to bed. How will we decide this?" And after a good deal of thought, Shanka replied to the king, "We must send them to Cú Roí Mac Daire." Cú Roí Mac Daire was another king in Ulster, who was a great and powerful sorcerer. It was thought that he would be the one who could conjure sufficient trials to decide the fate of the Champions portion. But when Cuchulain, Conall Cernach and Laoighaire Budhach arrived at the house of Cú Roí, they found he was not there. He had left command of his keep to his daughter, Blonnet. The 3 warriors approached the Queen Regent. "Welcome, warriors of the Red Branch. My father frequently travels the world in search of new wonders and treasure, but so powerful is he that he protects this keep wherever he is in the world. Every night, This home is attacked by a whole manner of horrible creatures, attempting to steal the essence of my father's power. But this whole fort is enchanted, and when nightfall comes at the end of each day, this entire home spins around like a wheel, and all of the entrances and exits are blocked and jumbled up so that no one comes in and no one goes out. The only thing that remains is a tall tower in the centre, which is fit for one man only. So the challenge to you three is this. Whichever of you can man that tower and defend our home for one whole night will earn the right to the champion's portion. The three warriors were all satisfied and welcomed this challenge. Budhach took the first night. When nightfall came, he stood outside the fort and watched as, like the pieces of an ancient puzzle, the fort spun and contorted until it was an unrecognizable shape with no windows or doors. The only thing that remained the same was the single tower at the centre. Budhach climbed to the top and prepared for the night. It was eerily quiet for a time. Lyra looked out into the distant plain and saw not even the light of a torch or the sound of movement through the wind. What Lyra should have been looking for was the sea, for from the calm of the current emerged an enormous giant, carrying in his hefty arms the trunk of an old oak tree which he wielded like a hurley. He began to swing his weapon at the one lone sentry, but Budhach spotted the ogre just in time to duck. Lyra began to hurl arrows and daggers at the monster, but could not seem to hit him. Large as he was, the giant evaded all shots fired. Lyra grew tired, and confined to his tower, there was nowhere for him to move out of the way to. The giant eventually got close enough to grab Lyra between his colossal hands, and launched the warrior high into the air like a human slither, and pelted him with the hurl over Cú Roí Mac Daire's fort. The giant then returned to the waves. The next morning, Budhach returned inside the fort feeling like a failure, but soon discovered that because all the windows and doors had been sealed, no one had seen what had happened. They had just all heard the sound of the fighting, and the sound of Lyra landing on the far side of the fort. The people inside all assumed that following on from defeating his enemy, Budhach had sought to prove his prowess further by leaping over the entirety of the tall and broad home of Cú Roí Mac Daire. And when Budhach heard this, he said nothing to oppose it. "Oh yes," he lied. It was too easy, if anything." The following night, Cernach stood outside the fort, watched it contort and transform, climbed into the tower, and prepared for battle. He met the same giant, and had as much luck fighting him. Cernach was the largest of the three warriors, and so the giant had more purchase on using him for sport, and battered Conall over the keep just as he had done Budhach. When Cernach returned the next morning, he too claimed to have slain the giant and leapt over the fort, and no one could prove him wrong. Then it was Cuchulainn's turn. The Hound of Ulster stood outside, marvelled at the enchantment of the fort, and climbed to his station. But Cuchulainn instantly saw torches over the hill, as 9 warriors charged Cú Roí's home. Cuchulainn called to them, "Stop, unless you want to die this night." They did not stop, and Cuchulainn launched arrows at them with such strength and ferocity he took the heads off all 9 of them. This happened twice more, where 2 times 9 soldiers charged, and 2 times 9 soldiers lost their heads. Cuchulainn was beginning to sweat when he turned to see the giant had emerged from the waves. The giant went to grab Cuchulainn as he had done the previous 2 warriors, but Cuchulainn ran up the giant's arm with his sword and sliced the monster's head clean off his neck. As the sun was about to rise, with his last breath of strength, Cuchulainn performed his mighty salmon leap over the fort of Cú Roí Mac Daire and landed safely on the other side. When morning came, and Blonid could see the trail of severed heads and blood painted across the plain, the evidence was clear, and Cuchulainn was declared the winner. But once again, Budhach and Conall Cernach would not accept this. Cuchulainn must have had help from his friends from the other side, they argued. Cuchulainn would not argue with them. He was above that. But once again, the fate of the champion's portion was not decided. Sometime later, there was another great feast held at Éamonn Macha at the court of King Conchobar Mac Nessa. Conall Cernach was guarding Ulster's borders, and Cuchulainn was at home with his wife Emer. Otherwise, all of the Red Branch Knights were in attendance, including Budhach. In the middle of dinner, the feast was interrupted by the arrival of a strange creature. He was long and tall and wore a cowhide around his waist. Half man and half ogre, he carried a broad, sharp axe and introduced himself as Uav the Stranger. "I have travelled the length and breadth of this island in search of a man of honour, and I have not yet met one. So I have come to Ulster, where they say the bravest and most honourable men live. My challenge is this, for a warrior to come and use this axe to chop my head off. Then the next day, to allow me to return, and return the favour by chopping his head off." The entire assembled host looked at each other in confusion. Was this creature mad, or was this some trick? "Is there no one here who accepts my challenge?" mocked Uav. Budhach stood up and announced, "I will." The Ulster contender approached Uav the Stranger, who set up a chopping block between them. He handed Lara the axe and then knelt down to accept his fate. Raising the axe high above him, Budhach brought the blade down and cut off the stranger's head in one clean stroke. The head landed on the ground with a thud, and a pool of blood began to form on the floor. The Red Branch Knights began to cheer, but the applause abruptly stopped when the body of Uav the Stranger stood up, picked up the severed head, and replaced it back on the top of his neck like it was a goblet that had fallen off the table. Lara stood, dumbfounded. "I'll see you tomorrow," said the stranger, and he took his axe and left Éamonn Macha. Budhach was terrified. He was smart enough to know he probably didn't have the same head restoration powers that this strange creature had. With little option left, Budhach ran away. When Uav the Stranger returned the next day and realised what had happened, he began to mock Ulster. "So it seems the heroes of Ulster are just as cowardly as the rest of this miserable wet island." Conall Cernach was present this time and couldn't stand to hear Ulster spoken of in such a way. "I will accept your challenge," he said, and grabbed the axe off the stranger. Uav once again kneeled down, and swiftly Conall Cernach cut off his head, and then cut the severed head into 2 further pieces. This would surely do the trick. But as before, Uav's headless body picked up the pieces, replaced his head, and told Conall Cernach he would see him tomorrow, if he dared. Conall Cernach did not dare, and he too ran away. And so the matter was left, as these matters always were, in the hands of Cuchulainn. The Hound of Ulster had heard of the goings-on and returned to Éamonn Macha to face Uav the Stranger. Cuchulainn cut off the creature's head and hurled it into the rafters of Éamonn Macha, but the corpse just climbed back up there and fished it out. Then he told Cuchulainn, "I probably won't see you tomorrow, as you're probably just as much of a coward as the other two." Cuchulainn was no coward. But Cuchulainn was also human. He was terrified of meeting his end in this way, executed like a criminal instead of in the glory of battle. He wept that he would never see Emer again, but Cuchulainn would rather have died with honour then lived as a coward. And so the next day, when Uamh the stranger returned, Cuchulainn was there to face him. The Hound of Ulster slowly kneeled down and laid his head on the block. He held his arms outstretched and demanded Uamh do his duty. The stranger raised the axe high over Cuchulainn's neck and brought it down right beside his head, missing him entirely. Cuchulainn looked back up in confusion, and standing there, holding the axe, was Cú Roí Mac Daire. "Congratulations, Hound of Ulster. This was your final task. You have proved yourself to all of Ulster that you are, and always will be entitled to, the champion's portion. And if either of those two cowards out there, or anyone else for that matter, dares to dispute this again, they will meet their end by my hand." And that is how the fate of the champion's portion of Ulster was finally decided. To be continued. And that is the story of the champion's portion of Ulster on Fireside. A really, really interesting tale. 2 parts to the tale. I quite liked these. Oh no, my banjo fell on the ground. How often can you say that in a sentence? Maybe just. Okay, I fixed my banjo. Yeah, what I like is that this story is a 2-parter. It's actually a 3-parter in a lot of versions. If, believe it or not, in the middle section, Cuchulainn, Conall Cernach and Laoighaire Budhach go to Connacht to visit Queen Maeve and King Conall, and they have another couple of trials by them. But I felt it was stronger with these 2 points. I just keep it centered on Bicrú and on Cú Roí Mac Daire, because especially them going to visit Connacht maybe works well if you have this story before the Táin, and absolutely any of these stories could come in any order. But for the sake of the order that we have ended up going in with this podcast, I thought it would seem a bit strange just to casually go back to Queen Maeve and King Conall, and I thought it worked stronger as these 2 parts, which very much feel like they do stand alone as well, because it's such a simple concept, just the idea of deciding the champion's portion. It certainly does make much more sense to tell this story before the Táin, because how in God's name would Cuchulainn have to prove himself more to anybody? There was probably just a little bit of an alarming jump there, folks. I'm so glad I spotted that straight away. My memory card was full that I was recording on, and I literally just got another flash just saying memory card full, and I just had to very quickly delete something from there, which thank God I was able to just cut back straight into the file. The old Zoom H4n, it's great little bit of gear, and I am not a very technically minded person, so it's the fact that even I could spot that is happy days, because I remember when I was recording this podcast in America last year on the road, that I was recording a podcast and I paused it to go and look something up that I was referencing, and then I recorded about half the rest of the episode, and I realized I wasn't recording it, so I was literally just talking in a room to myself, which it can feel like I am doing anyway, but at least when it's recording, I feel eventually someone will be listening to it. But that could have been the case there, but thank God I was able to just delete an earlier file and keep going. But yes, this part of the story, so we get introduced to Cú Roí Mac Daire, who is this sorcerer figure that I haven't come across before, and his amazing changing house, which seems like some kind of combination from something out of Pan's Labyrinth, and like the staircases in Hogwarts, this idea of this warping, contorting house that protects itself by blocking all its entrances and exits and jumbling them up is such an incredible image. The idea of this just trickster sorcerer king traveling around the world and having this house full of magic and treasures that all sorts of monsters constantly covet, and leaving his daughter to rule it, and then he takes the form of this half ogre long demon creature, which again seems like something out of Beowulf. It seems like Grendel or something at the end. This horrible misshapen creature comes in, and it is in fact Uv in disguise. And this brilliant trial of cutting the head off and then asking to cut someone's head off only on the terms that they can then cut your head off, which I won't spoil anything, which just reminds me a huge amount of the Neil Gaiman novel American Gods, which has a pretty major element to it that certainly the novel does, to something that anyone who has read the book will know immediately what I'm talking about. Not directly in terms of, but something very similar to that kind of bargain in it, which is interesting that it's obviously this, like so many stories, does travel across different mythologies and different folklores, because American Gods, for anyone who hasn't read it, I advise you to. It's a very strange book. As I frequently say, I'm an enormous Neil Gaiman fan. American Gods was a very worthwhile experience, as he touches on so many different mythologies and folklore, but it's definitely not for everyone, and the TV adaptation actually of it isn't bad. I've only seen the first series and a half, but I've actually enjoyed it quite a lot. But yeah, no, there is an element in that if people have read it, they'll know what I'm talking about, of the idea of, I will let you cut my head off if you can let me cut your head off tomorrow. And that just echoed there. But there's something, in that there's something almost Norse or Viking about this, this tale of banquet halls and the proving who's the mightiest. It gets very Nordic, which I really like. It seems to exist it's a different kind of story as part of the Ulster cycle, which is why it's so brilliant that so many stories from the Ulster cycle have survived, that we do get these various different kinds of tales. And these are two stories that I didn't really know of at all, and the images conjured in them and characters like Bicru, and just introduce the world of the Red Branch Knights and the world of the Ulster cycle being padded out with extra characters like Budhach and Conall Cernach and Shanka, Cungabar MacNass's advisor. These just continue to flesh out this world so much in such a gorgeous way. But that is that story for the week. That is the end of another episode. I'm delighted I was able to salvage that episode by continuing the recording. Oh, I'm so happy I spotted that. Fair play, Zoom H4. Someone is smiling on me. So if you enjoyed the podcast, please do like, subscribe, leave ratings wherever you'd want to do any of that. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Please do leave me ratings, subscribe to it. Follow me on Instagram at FiresideBard, all one word. Send me messages if you have any thoughts or comments on the podcast, any kinds of stories you'd like to hear, especially at this time. I really do want to be able to help in any way I can, and if any of you out there have any suggestions for us all getting through this, I am happy to help out in any way I can. If you really want to support the podcast, you can of course do so at the Patreon, patreon.com/Fireside Podcast. And thanks so much to Alan and Paddy up at Headstuff for continuing to put out this podcast, to Jamie, my editor, and thank you so much to all of you for listening. And until next time, you'll see me all, I'll hear you. I'll see you all and you'll hear me next time round the fireside. Thank you and goodbye.
This podcast is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network.